Hello and welcome to another edition of A Chat With. Today, Rock and Vodka presents A Chat With former Toronto Maple Leaf scout and general manager, Gerald McNamara. Mr. McNamara, it is an honor to meet you and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. You can call me Jerry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you can call me anything you want to. Now, you've had
We'll
a
see.
long you've had a long and storied at times career in hockey, going back to as a youth, of course, playing hockey. And you've had an opportunity to play at most levels, including a professional level. You have some great accolades. You were a goaltender. Why goalie?
Um, Sam, I started to play goal when I was 6 years old, and I never left it. I enjoyed it very much. It was a great place to play. And I always say, because of me being a goaltender, it really helped me in my scouting because I had a panoramic view of all the plays that went on with all the players that I played behind. And I saw the mistakes and I saw the good things and I saw some bad things. And so it registered in my brain and I used it when I became a scout.
Now that's interesting because I unfortunately my mom wasn't very rich and she was a single parent. So I had a choice of playing football or hockey. Hockey was my love, but it was cheaper for me to play football because all I had to supply was cleats and stupidity.
Right.
And I had both of those. So that was my thing. And then when I got older, I got into playing adult hockey, beer league hockey, and that sort of thing. And I loved playing the sport. But like you, I was a goalie because in baseball, I was a catcher. And that was the exact reason I was a catcher. I could watch everything unfold in front of me. And that was the thing. And you're kind of the last bastion before a point is scored. You are that last piece that they have to pass. It's pass you or get nothing. And that's what I loved. I loved um, that feel. And as a goaltender playing hockey, I felt the same thing. And I would never change the position if, except for lack of talent. That's the only reason I didn't play goal for my entire life. And I just think that it's a great position. And I'm glad that you enjoyed it as much.
It was a great position. It was the last line of defense. So you better be good and hope you're not bad.
Exactly. Now you had an opportunity to win an Allen Cup.
Yes.
That must have been exciting. That is a great prestigious trophy, and it's in my eyes second to the Stanley Cup in hockey. And it must have been an honor to be a part of that legacy of the cup.
It was an honor. I never won it.
Oh, I thought you did.
No, I wasn't part of that team. Something else happened to me before that. My last game was September the 21st, 1972. And October the 1st, I started to work for the Maple Leafs. And that's the reason why I wasn't with that team. But we did go out west and play Spokane and got beat. And I was picked up by Barrie and we went out west again and got beat. But it was really enjoyable. It was a great experience. And I congratulate the players that stayed in 72, 73 with Aurelia, and they won the Allen Cup. And most of them were my friends. I had played with them before.
Oh, that's awesome. Now you mentioned back in October of '72, you become a scout for the Toronto Maple Leafs. When you started out, were you just like a local scout, like in a certain Ontario area, or did you travel extensively?
No, when I was hired by Jim Gregory, who was kind of my number one hero in my life, when I was hired by Jim, He asked me to be the special assignment scout, which meant that they could send me anywhere they wanted to, and I would go. And one of the places that he sent me to was Sweden to see a goaltender, Kurt Larson. And I liked him, but he wasn't any better than what we had. So there wasn't much sense in taking him. But when I was over there, there were two tournaments going on, the Ahern Cup and the Star Cup. And I stayed and watched games from those two uh, uh, tournaments. And I must tell you that I was the only scout there. I had the whole of Sweden to myself, and I had a joyous time. And one of the teams that played there was the Barrie team, which I played with them the year before. And I'd gone to out west with them, and I knew the players. And so I went to Yavla to see Borja play and Inga because I'd seen them before in Vesteros, and I wanted to catch them again. But I also wanted to see the Barrie team because I knew the players personally. I wanted to say hello. As a result, the game was really, really tough, really tough. You know, Canadians always had the mentality that we're going to go over there and we'll beat them up. We'll run them right out of the rink. Well, this didn't happen. They tried, and I must say that Borja took an awful pounding, but he gave it back. And it told me something about Borja. They had a lot of courage, and he had unbelievable moves. And Inga scored 5 goals. And when Borja got thrown out of the game, I don't know whether he touched the referee or pushed him or something, but he got thrown out of the game. And I was sitting with Mr. Johnson, who was the vice president of Canadian Hockey at CHA. And Borja walked right in front of me with the trainer going to the dressing room. And I said to Mr. Johnson, I have to go. And I took off and followed Borja to the dressing room. And when they got inside, I rapped on the door. The trainer came and answered the door. And I said, I want to speak with Borja. And Borja put the trainer out of the room. Now, Borja's story is a little bit different, and I can understand why. He said, I don't know how he got in the room. Then that's all he said. But he came to me and handed me a card. This is Borja talking. And I handed him my special assignment card and said, I'm a scout with the Toronto Maple Leafs. You could play for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Have you interest? And Inga too. And he said, speak to Inga, good English. He didn't speak very good English, but he understood what I was saying. And so I left him with the card. I left the room. I went back out and waited for the team to come off the ice. I never went back to Mr. Johnson. So he probably said, well, that was nice. Left me and never come back. Anyway, but he didn't understand why after all the things that happened. Anyhow, I talked to Inga, and Inga called me at 1 o'clock in the morning. I told him where I was staying, the S Hotel in Yavla. And he called me and we had a chat, and I told him what was going to happen. And he was all for it. And Inga at night scored 5 goals against Barrie. And Borja had 2 goals. And the two of them played really well. And I was impressed big time. And so, anyhow, I never saw the Barrie guys because I was too wrapped up in what I was doing. But that was one of the things that Jim Gregory did was he sent me to Sweden. Now, the next time when the people saw how these players played here with the Maple Leafs, next year the place was crawling with scouts when I went back. There were all kinds of scouts, and as a result of the way Borja played, the exodus from Europe began, and they all started to come over. So Borja was the trailblazer. They saw how he played, and they all wanted to come here, and that's what happened. And that's why the league changed completely. All that blood and thunder stuff with the Philadelphia Flyers sort of disappeared over a little bit of time, and all the skill came over from Europe, and they have lots and lots of skill.
And that's the beautiful thing. Um, They were both very, very good players. Inga Hammerstrom and Boreas Salming were very good players, but they were both different styles as well. Like
No
you
question
said,
about
Boria could give it as much as he could take, and Inga, well, he was like, "Catch me if you can."
it. Let me tell you something. This is my own opinion, and I've said it many times. Inga was mishandled by the Toronto Maple Leafs, in my opinion. Inga
Interesting.
scored 20 goals every year he was there. And he only played on the third and fourth lines. He never played on the first or second line. So that meant he played with the third and fourth players, weren't as good as the guys who are playing on the first line. Inga was probably the best skater on the team other than Boya, because Boya could skate like you wouldn't believe. He was a ballerina on the ice. He could, if you go and look at pictures, videos from the past, and I say this, I'm going to tell you something that maybe your audience is going to say, is this guy crazy? I'm not crazy. I just say to the people, listen to what I'm going to say. In my opinion, Boreas Salming was the best defenseman that ever played in the National Hockey League. And that's including all the greats, the Bobby Orrs, the Robinsons, the Potvins, the Lidstroms, all those guys. Go and look at the video and watch the moves that Boria had. I call him Plastic Man. He could stretch here and stretch there and avoid this and avoid that and skate. He was terrific, and he played in both ends. And plus the fact he played the same every night. He was 100%er, and he never backed off an inch. He always hung in there. It didn't matter whether he was in a fight or whether they were spearing him or what they were doing. He was always there, and he never backed off an inch. And that tells me that that's how good he really was. And I know people will say, because everybody says it, that Bobby Orr was the greatest, and they can say it, then I don't have any problem. I know Bobby Orr, and I really like Bobby Orr. When I coached Dallas down in the Central Hockey League, I had Chicago and Toronto players on my team. They were the fine club of those two teams. And boy, Bobby Orr used to come down to see the Chicago players because he was in Chicago at the time. He didn't play because of his injuries, but he would come down and sort of look at the players and take back his opinion. I like Bobby. He was a nice guy. I met him and I got a lot of room for him, but I'm trying to be a scout that watches a game and stepping back and never mind who you liked or you didn't like personally. You sort of judge them by what they did on the ice. And I never saw players on defense make the moves that Boya made. Now, there are lots of video uh, pieces out there. If people want to go and see, you can go and see them. And I'm telling you right now, he'll show you things that you won't see any other defenseman use. And Boreas Salming should have won at least 4 Norris trophies. 4. And I can tell you that what happened was that there was discrimination about the Swedes. Lots of people weren't happy when the Swedes came to the NHL. I can tell you that right now. They wanted US players, Canadian players, and that was it. And when Borje come over, he changed the picture. And they started to come over. And of course, when they come over, they took jobs away from some of the Canadians and some of the US guys. But that's the way competition is. You can't just say, well, okay, we're going to stay in our own bailiwick. You say you go and you have a chance. And I went over there and I found a player that we don't have. We don't have him here in Canada or the US. I found a player that could do things that those people couldn't do. And that's why he came to Toronto, and that's why he's a legend. He's well known. He's still well known. Unfortunately, he passed away, and that's too bad. And I feel badly about it. And when I think about it, I get tears in my eyes because I'd love to be able to be say goodbye to him, and I wasn't able to do that.
I'm sorry to hear that. But you're right. At that time I was watching a lot of Toronto Maple Leaf hockey because as a youth, that's what was available to me was Toronto Maple Leaf hockey, and I can't remember ever seeing Boreas Salming get look silly. I can't ever remember him getting beat badly in anything. If he got beat through hustle. Whoever beat him had to earn whatever they earned getting past him. And I guess being a guy that played goal and catcher, like I said, I was fond of the defenseman.
But
I'm
I
fine
can
with forwards, but the defenseman for me, one of my favorite players was Ian Turnbull,
yeah, he played with
and
both.
yeah, and he would, and those were two great defensemen that the Toronto Maple Leafs had, and it just for me they were integral. They're more integral to me than a good forward.
If
Although
I,
you
if
couldn't
I
get
can
the goal.
just interject, if I can just
Sure.
interject, and I failed to say this, and I should have, because this is probably the most important thing of all. If you go and look what Boria did, and you said, well, if he got beat, if Boria got, he usually recovered. He had the greatest agility of anybody I ever saw on skates. That's a big thing that I'm saying. He could squeeze out of positions. He could be out of the play, and all of a sudden he's in the play. I don't know how he did it. He was a ballerina on skates, but the agility was unbelievable. And I haven't seen a player like that since. I'm telling you right now. I watched hockey. I've been in it for a long time, and I've watched it, but I haven't seen anybody that was agile as much as Boria on the ice.
Yeah, and that brings me to my next question regarding those two guys, Inga and Boreas Salming. When you discovered them and came back from that trip, was it a hard sell to convince the Leafs to sign those men?
No, no, I can tell you exactly what happened. As soon as I saw them, I put them on the negotiation list because there was no draft at that time, and put them on the negotiation list. And I come back home, and we talked about it, and we brought them over in May, and we signed them to contracts. And I used to get it from my own guys, Johnny McClellan, Bob Davidson would be there, King Clancy would be there. They'd be sitting in Clancy's office, and the Swedes would come up. And Johnny McClellan used to say to me a number of times, Mac, you better be right, because we'd signed them. We committed to them. And I said to Johnny McClellan, I went to him one day and I said, Johnny, I'm telling you right now, this guy, Borja Salmon, is going to be a superstar in the National Hockey League. That's how good he is. And I said, Inga, there's no problem with it. Inga can skate as well as anybody in the National Hockey League. Inga doesn't have to be a robust player. I played with lots of guys, and there were a lot of guys on the Maple Leafs, a lot of guys on every team that weren't very robust, but they still were really good players. And Inga was a really good player, but they mishandled him. They didn't put him in the right spot. And he found his way. And then, of course, Mr. Ballard come up with that garbage saying that I'll never repeat. I hate listening to it. And I was devastated when I heard it. And I know Inga was devastated. It hurt his career. And the thing is this, that as I said before, lots of things happened to Inga that should never have happened.
That's a shame because I know exactly what you're talking about, and I won't mention it either. And I think that was just derogatory for being derogatory, not because of any incident or any play or anything. I think it was decided that's how he was, and instead of just keeping it to yourself, was thrown out there. And like you said, it hurt his career. But he was a phenomenal player. He was great.
No, no question. No question.
Now,
And the thing is this, is that here's an example of Mr. Ballard. He's the owner of the team, and he comes out with a stupid statement like that to one of your players. Are you kidding me? You don't talk about your players regardless. If you're the owner, you just keep your mouth shut and let the people, the hockey people, run the team. But he wanted to run the team. And one of the things, the big things with me, was I was never able to hire my own coach. I always had to take the coach that he wanted, and go and argue with him and see what happens. Be looking for another job. So, and I can tell you stories about the coaches. Uh, Mike Nicollet was the first coach I had, and I liked Mike. But Mr. Ballard told me, and he said, get rid of that, and he used a derogatory term. And I had to go and tell Mike, you're being relieved. I'm sorry. And I know Mike felt badly about it. I felt badly about it, but there's nothing I can do because the owner is the owner. He is the owner, and he lets you know he's the owner. And if you want to argue with him, find another job. And I'll give you down the road when we're talking here, I'll give you an example. So anyway, then along comes, and then he said, I want Danny Maloney to be the coach. So he's the assistant coach. So Danny did a pretty good job. And what happened to Danny was he came in one morning, he asked for a new contract. So we negotiated a contract. He wanted a 3-year deal. And I told him, I can't get you a 3-year deal, Danny, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I said, if our team does well this year coming up, I said, I'll get you a 3-year deal. But now I'm offering you $130,000, and it's only for 1 year, but take it because I think our young team is going to grow. And anyway, he agreed to it. That same that same day, we had a news conference up in Newmarket. We were bringing our team from St. Catharines to Newmarket. And Danny was at that meeting. It was a press conference. And when I got there, Bernie Fournier, who was Mr. Ballard's chauffeur, he asked me if I would bring him back to the gardens after the meeting that we're having. And I said, I'd be happy to. And anyway, in the meantime, I'm over here talking to people. Danny's over listening to the press conference. He comes to me and he's livid. He said, you hear what that Ballard's saying? I said, what are you talking about, Danny? He said, he just told those people we had beaten Detroit in a round, and then we went on to play St. Louis. We lost to St. Louis, and Mr. Ballard blamed Danny Maloney, and he told the press that's the reason why we lost, because of Danny Maloney. So Danny come to me and he said, you know that contract we agreed to? He said, I'm coming in tomorrow morning and I want a 3-year deal. Now I have a feeling it's something in his pocket when he came in the next morning, because he insisted on the 3. First of all, he said, do I have to go in there? And I said, no, Danny, that's my job. And I got up off my chair and from my desk. I walked into Mr. Ballard, which was just maybe 20 feet away, through 2 doors. And I said, Danny Maloney's out there and he wants a 3-year deal, or he's walking. He said, tell him to have a nice walk. This is exactly what he said. Okay.
wow.
So I come out to Danny and I said, Danny, he told me to tell you have a nice walk. And I wish you all the best. And he walked out. And Danny went to coach Winnipeg. He got a job with Winnipeg. So I have a feeling that he had somebody that approached him and offered him a deal if he ever left Toronto, and he took that. And the unfortunate part about Danny is he passed away up in Barrie, and he wasn't in very good shape. And I feel badly about that. So anyway, to get back to the meeting and driving Mr. Ballard back to the gardens. Soon as he's in my car, 30 seconds after he got in my car, he said, Gerry, you know that contract you have with Danny Maloney? Keep it in your pocket. I want John Brophy to be the coach. My heart went from here right up to my throat. And I had to think really quickly. And I said to Mr. Ballard, Mr. Ballard, I'm going to Hilton Head next week. Brophy's going to be there. It's the American League meetings. Brophy's going to be there. Let me sit down and have a chat with him. And when I come back, you and I will sit down and we'll talk about this. He said, Gerry, great idea. Next week, I go to Hilton Head and I'm in the American League meeting at 11:30. I came out, it's over. And there was somebody there standing with a camera. And he come up to me and said, excuse me, can you tell me where John Brophy is? I said, what are you talking about? John Brophy, what do you want John Brophy for? He said, he's just been named the coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. That was Mr. Bell.
Wow.
So that's how he got his job. And I tried to fire him 15 times. I bet I tried to fire him. And I wasn't able. And I remember when he was in this, it's my fault that he's there. Because I got his name and I asked an executive of Montreal, how is he? Like, what is he like? And he said, no problem. He's good. And so I took him. I assigned him to us, me. I'm the only one that did it. And I feel badly that I did do it. It probably cost me my job. But the thing is this, that when he became the coach, I had to negotiate a contract with him, which he just got on the scene, so I didn't know much about him, but I gave him a contract. And except for, I shouldn't say I didn't know much about him. I'm fast forwarding. What happened was Danny Maloney come up to my office and said, get this guy out of here. I said, Danny, what are you talking about? He said, I'm talking about Brophy. Get him out of here. I don't want him as an assistant coach. And I had to send Brophy to St. Catharines, and I brought up Claire Alexander. I felt badly for Claire because Claire moved his family into St. Catharines and it settled in, was doing a good job for St. Catharines. And I had to bring him up to Toronto to take Brophy's place because Danny Maloney didn't want him. So Brophy was the thorn in the side all while I was the general manager. He didn't like me and I didn't like him. But Mr. Ballard kept saying to me, every time I went in to see him to try to get rid of him, he'd say, you better learn to get along with him. He's the coach. He would not let me fire him. I thought I had him once, convinced, but I tried to call him after a game at St. Louis, beat us in the Gardens, and we made a deal that I could fire him. But you always check with Mr. Ballard, because if you don't check with him for the final word, you can get into big trouble. So I tried to get a hold of him. He wouldn't answer his phone. He disappeared. The next morning I went to see him and I said, okay, he said, nah, I don't want to do it. No, you get along with him. He's going to be the coach. And so I couldn't fire him. And as a result, I said, he probably, as I said, he probably cost me my job because he wasn't a very good coach. I'll give you another story about Brophy just to give you an idea of what the players must have thought of him. So I'm at home. The team is on the road. They're in Minnesota, and they got beat. And, hockey players, they go out after the game. And they have a few, I guess. Then they come back to the room, and they probably bring a few with them, and maybe a pizza or two. And they sort of get into a couple of rooms, and they get a little loud. And we're at the Marriott Hotel, and they get a call at the desk. Somebody complained about the noise. And so I wasn't there. So they phoned Brophy. He's the coach. And you know what he said? I bet you can't guess what he said. Nobody
idea.
can ever guess what he said. Every time I tell this story, I said, guess what he said. Nobody can guess it. You know what he said? Call the police.
On his
And
own
the police
players?
on the players. And the police came and they threw the players out of the hotel. They had to go next door to the Hilton Hotel and get rooms. And then in the morning, he sent Borja Salmon home. Okay. Now, what some coaches, dumb coaches sometimes, they always pick out the big guy and say, I'll show them who I am. And they send maybe the best player down. Obviously, the best player. So they send him over to back to Toronto. I get a call in the afternoon from Borja. He said, I'm leaving. I'm going home. I said, what are you talking about? He said, no, I can't take this. I can't take it. I'm going home. I said, and I talked to him. I said, Borja, you've had such a great career. Don't do this to yourself. I said, you can't do that. Don't quit. You got to stay, regardless of what happened. He said, the only way I'll stay is if Mr. Browder goes out and publicly apologizes for what happened. So I went in to see Mr. Ballard and I told him exactly what was happening. And he said, well, you go out. I said, I can't go out. It's not up to me. He wants you. And so I assume he went out and apologized. I never listened to the radio and I didn't read the sports pages for my own self-preservation because I wanted to run the team the way I wanted to run it and not what other people were saying out there. So I didn't want to hear what was going on out there. But the thing is this, that obviously he apologized because Borja stayed. But how do you like that for a coach to do that? Throw his own players under the bus.
That's
Now,
craziness.
and you think I didn't have a hard time trying to get rid of the guy and he wouldn't let me get rid of him? He was brutal. He was brutal. And I know he passed away, but he knew exactly how I felt about him because I couldn't put anything on and pretend I liked him. I am me, and I stayed me all the way, all the while I was the general manager of Toronto Maple Leafs. And I treated people fairly. I never lied to them. Never once did I ever lie to a player. I don't lie, number one. So I didn't have any cause to lie to a player. I told them like it was. If I sent them down, I said, look, you're going down. I can't say you're going to be the first player back. If we need a player, we'll take the player that we need. Whoever's playing the best. If it's you, fine. But if it's not you, you don't come back. That isn't the way it worked with me. I want the best players going to come in and help the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, and that was my policy. And so I had the same policy with the coach. I didn't want to pretend I liked him when I didn't like him. I wanted to know I didn't like him. I didn't agree with what he was doing. And I know lots and lots of players didn't have any use for him. But he ended up being the coach. And like I say, it probably cost him my job.
And with that, we are running out of time. I just want to say that it is an amazing thing. And I would love to, if you have some time, do a second interview with you and continue on into your general manager years further and talk about the great documentary on Borja Salming that is now out. And if you're up for it, I would love to do that maybe later this week.
Let me know because I'm tied up on Friday. Okay, I'm tied up on Friday. It'll have to be sometime maybe next week.
Perfect.
But if you call me and let me know, I'll let you know whether I can do it. Because when you get to my age, you have appointments, and you have to keep them.
All right,
So,
and with that, we'll take a break, and we will be back very, very soon with part 2 of our interview with Gerry McNamara. Welcome back, and this is a chat with Gerry McNamara, former GM and scout for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And Gerry, how are you?
I'm doing well, Sam. Thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. Getting very excited for Christmas. Looking forward to it. And I hope you are as well.
I am very much so.
Now, when we talked in the first part of the interview, we talked about your scouting. We talked a little bit about how you got Boria Salming and Inga Hammerstrom. We talked a little bit about one of your coaching. We'll call it a coaching hire, even though you didn't do the hiring because you kind of got blindsided. And then we'll move on from that. Now, in your time as a general manager, you had some very good teams with the Toronto Maple Leafs, but they couldn't get over the hump and win the Stanley Cup. Now, I don't want to get into the whole it's the coach's fault, it's the GM's fault. It's, you know, for me as an outsider looking in, I think that a lot of it was distraction. And when I say distraction, I say it with all due respect. Harold Ballard. He caused more heartache than I can remember. I remember captains taking their C's off. I can remember coaches getting Roger Nielsen getting fired and then rehired, and him wanting to wear a bag over his face when he came back out. All those kind of things. Those kind of things had to contribute to turmoil, and that had to resonate down, whether you liked it or not, to the team. And how did you try to fight that?
Well, first of all, I thought that we drafted really well. I like the fact that we drafted, I guess my first draft was Nyland, Courtnall, Iafredi, Danfus. Uh, we drafted Daniel Marois in the second round. I thought that our first round draft choices all came to the Toronto Maple Leafs as 18-year-olds, and they all made the team, and they all stayed in the National Hockey League for the rest of their careers. Never spent a day in the minors except for Nyland, who was down in, I think it was with the Islanders at the time. He went down for a 2-week rehab. That's the only guy that ever spent any time in the minors. So that must speak pretty well for those players, how well they had done, and include Richardson also. I think he was in my last draft. My last draft was Richardson, Marois, John McIntyre, Joe Sacco, Damian Rhodes, and Mike Eastwood. That's 6 guys that played in the National Hockey League, and that's the first 6 choices. That's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's pretty good. So
That is.
Go ahead.
Oh, that was it. I was just saying, yeah, it is.
So the thing is this, that I had a plan. I'm not sure. It was a pretty good plan. I thought that we had some up and coming players, give them a chance to get their feet under the NHL, and then they'll be able to blossom. And I really felt, and Kenny Raggett we had in goal, and Alan Bester. And the thing is this, that we got waylaid. My last year that I was general manager with the Maple Leafs, I had a plan. And my plan was, I know our team was going to be iffy, and the next draft was going to have Eric Lindros. And I had a plan in my head that we were going to win Eric Lindros. There was no, at that time, there was no lottery. It was the last place club picked the first overall. Now, by the way, I left out Wendell Clark in those 6 guys that I drafted. Okay, so the thing is this, where I helped to draft. So the thing is this, is that in my head, I said, we're not ready yet to make the big push, but we're starting to put the pieces in place. And I think it's going to happen with things that we can do along the way. But the key is we have to get Eric Lindros. So in my head was, that's what I was going to do. Now, as it turned out, if you look back, the Maple Leafs, I got fired by Mr. Ballard. I told him at the time, I said, you're making the wrong move. I'm not the guy you should be firing. You should be firing the coach. But you fired me, And I just want to tell you, I would have bet half my salary that we could have made the push to become a pretty good team. And he said, well, I didn't know that. I said, well, why didn't you talk to me before you fired me? And he didn't really have an answer except for his first thing he said is, you're always welcome to come to Maple Leaf Gardens anytime you want. Now, he didn't say whether I had to pay or not. I'm not too sure. Maybe he'd make me pay. so, because he was good at that. So anyhow, to get back to the story, as a result, the Maple Leafs ended up in 19th spot, and the Quebec hockey team ended up in 20th spot. And of course, the 20th spot got the Merrick Lindros, and the 19th spot got Jersey Niedermeyer, which is not too shabby. You would have taken either one of those players, but I wanted Lindros, and I promised you I would have gotten Lindros. Now, what happened was that during the year when I left, and I always felt that your first round draft choice, especially if you're near the top, it's almost sacrilegious to trade that choice. You hang on to it because you can get a really good player, one of the building blocks for your team. And I remember Lindros going to Calgary to watch him play in a junior training camp. And he was a man playing with boys, I felt. So I had my eyes on him. But what the Maple Leafs did when I got fired is they traded their first round draft choice for Tom Curvers. And Tom Curvers was a good player, but he wasn't the first round draft choice where the Maple Leafs would have been picking. I would take Eric Lindros over Tom Curvis, and I would also take Niedermeyer over Tom Curvis. But the Maple Leafs had no chance of getting either one of those players because they traded their first round draft choice. Now, I would never have done that. I promise you, I would never have done that because to me, the draft is kind of sacred. You want to be participating in it and you want to have all your choices, unless you're able to make a deal for a second, third, or fourth round draft choice down the road and you're getting a really good player back. Otherwise, you hang on to everything. And they didn't do that. And it was to their, if you check and see what their drafting record was after I left, I don't want to talk about it, but if anybody's interested, go back and look and tell me how they failed.
Now that's the thing. There's always been a saying going on when a general manager is hired or a coach is hired, they get the fingerprints of the previous person in that position. So when you took over the Toronto Maple Leafs, you took over. I believe it was for Punch, wasn't it?
Before me was Punch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, it was a Punch Imlach formed team and coaching that you took over at that time.
When Punch Simlak took over, the draft that he took was Jim Benning. That was his choice. When I took over, my choice was Nyland. And unfortunately for Nyland, I remember being in Europe scouting, and I remember getting a call from Gordy Stellick telling me that Nyland got hurt and he got a bad knee injury. And I think it hurt him for the rest of his career. I really do.
Yeah, that kind of dogged him. I kind of remember that.
Yeah.
That he had the knee problems going forward, and um, it must
Well,
have been very
he was out for a long time for us rehabbing, but
yeah.
I don't think he ever got back to the way he could have been. That's my opinion. Uh, you remember Bobby Orr hurt his knee,
Yes.
and Bobby Orr, after he hurt his knee, wasn't really the same. So anyway, that's my opinion.
So as a general
And I'm
manager,
here, and I'm here to give you my opinion.
as a general manager, you handle a lot of the player movement, drafting, pot trades, that sort of thing, in conjunction with your coach. I'm assuming that you do ask the coach's opinion here and there, but in the end, it's your decision. But unfortunately, with you working for Harold, it really was your decision unless he didn't like it. And then he would veto things. Would he do that? Would he veto your possible trades, your possible draft picks, and say, "No, I want this instead"?
Well, I never heard of him disagreeing with the choices we made in the first round. I never ever heard him complain about that. So I just assumed he was happy with them. How can you not be happy when you draft six guys that come to the National Hockey League and they never play a game in the minors? How can you be unhappy with that? Which team
Exactly.
wouldn't mind taking that? And then I heard the other night I was on a time machine, and
With Paul.
it was no, I first was with James Jason Priestley, who played me in the
Oh,
film.
with you,
Uh,
yeah.
that's the first time machine, but the second time machine, I wasn't on the time machine per se, but I was there after for hockey talk. And there was a fellow, I think he's from Edmonton, put up on the screen where he did a research on all the drafts on the 6 years, it's actually 7 years, that when I was general manager, and I was number one. My name was at the top of
Yeah.
all the teams, and I knew that because I did it when I got fired. I went through all that stuff and did the math and did took each team and I'll tell you, it wasn't even close. That's all I can say. Now, anybody wants to go back and check, just go back and Google the drafts and go through them and do the same thing as I did, and then come back and tell me that I'm wrong.
Now, like I said, you had some good teams and you had some fairly good coaches as well. But you you also had coaches that were kind of thrust upon you. We talked about John Brophy earlier. Were there other coaches like that that were thrust upon you that you really fine whatever? Okay, whatever.
With the Maple Leafs, you mean?
Yes.
Wasn't even close. It wasn't even close. The other two guys, compared to John Brophy, wasn't even close.
But were
Brophy
they
was down. Brophy was down here, and the other guys were up here. Compared with Brophy, I mean, if you're a coach and you throw your players under the bus, as this that was, I told you what Brophy did with the players
right?
when he said call the police. How can you play for a guy like that? What do you think the players thought of him after that happened?
Yeah,
So,
that must
I
have
mean,
really
I knew
divided
it.
the room.
I knew it, but it couldn't get through Mr. Ballard's skull. It couldn't get through to him. He didn't understand. And I've always said that he didn't really know a lot about hockey. He was around it a lot of time. He saw a lot of teams, saw a lot of players, but he didn't really have the head to figure out what a good hockey player looked like. He listened to what other people said. And that was one of the main things that I had to worry about. I knew that he was out there and he was always listening to other people. If I had him beside me, I was okay. I had no problem with him. But when he got away from me, I used to shudder when some of the things were
When he got
going on.
off his leash.
Exactly. Exactly. When I had him beside me, I could talk to him and talk him down when he wanted to do some things, but I do it in a nice way. I wouldn't argue with him because if you argue with him, you end up getting fired. I didn't want to get fired. I love my job. I wouldn't have done it for nothing. Believe me, that's how much I loved it.
Yeah, and you can feel it when you talk and you tell some of the stories that you've told so far that you do love what you were doing and you were good at what you did. you listed off some of the names of the players that you drafted, and there were also good trades that you made as well, building up the team, and you were building a very good team, and you were only a few pieces away from a dominating team. What would you say is the fingerprint of a Jerry McNamara team? For me personally, I think it's a lunch pail team. They punch the clock, they get in there, they give 110%, they do what is expected of them, and let the chips fall where they may. Is that the fingerprint that you wanted with the team?
The thing is this, is that, first of all, I must tell you, when I was the general manager, there was a lot of noise out there from the press. And I didn't really pay too much attention to the press because I didn't have a really good relationship with it. And that was by design for me. I felt that I had to come out, and if they asked me questions, I'd tell them the truth. If I couldn't tell them what they were asking, I'd say, you know what, I can't say anything about that. And I wouldn't. But the thing is this, I didn't go out of my way to talk to the press. I had a couple of friends in it, but I remember the one fellow that I really, really liked. And I remember said, you know what, I'll tell you the truth, but if I tell you something in secrecy, you can't print it. He said, Jerry, if you tell it to me in secrecy, I'm printing it. He was up front with me. He became one of my good friends. And so the thing is this, I treated him well, but I didn't tell him things that I didn't want out. And he knew it, that there was something going on, but I wouldn't tell him. So the thing is this, I didn't mind having a relationship like that, but most of them, especially two of them, really were on my case. And so what I did was I shut them out. And the way I shut them out was I never read the papers. The other thing was I never listened to the radio except for when I was going home. I'd turn the radio on, but it was always at a classical music station. And all I listened to was classical music going home. I didn't want to hear what was out there. Even my brother would phone, did you hear what so and so wrote? I said, Murph, hold it. Don't tell me. I don't want to know. Just let me be. Don't tell me. I don't want to hear that stuff. I want to run the team the way I want to run it, and that's what I did. And if you look, and I've said many, many times, and I'll repeat it again, I'll never, ever, ever accept the responsibility for the record that we had. Just give me the responsibility of putting the players on the ice. I put those players on the ice, and I'll take responsibility for that. That's the only thing I'll take responsibility for, because I never hired my own coach. I was never able to put the fella that I thought could bring this team to where they wanted to go. And I always thought it was the promised land. And I thought we were on our way with our good drafting. And when I got fired, you saw what happened. They traded all those guys. They traded Clark, and they traded Dan Foos, and they traded Iafredi. They traded all those players. And they had to start over again. And so the thing is this, it set them back. And you see what happened, just check the records. I mean, general managers come in, did they do any better than I did? Did they
No.
draft better than I did? Those are the questions I ask. Not trying to pump myself up. I just know what I did. And I knew what my plan was, and I had a plan. But unfortunately, I had an owner like Mr. Ballard who thought he knew things, and he didn't really know that much about hockey as far as building a team. He didn't leave it to the people that should be building the team. And so that's where we went to.
And that's a shame because, like you said, you would compare your record as general manager to anybody, and you would come out on top or very very near the top depending on situations and year by year. And to be handcuffed like you were, that had to be very frustrating. And there had to be times when you asked yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I going through this?
Well, when I was general manager, it was okay because I was still there and we still had those players. It's when I left and I went, ended up getting hired by Calgary. But when I left, I started thinking about, and I say, boy, what a mistake they made. What a mistake. Because I checked the drafting. I looked at the drafting after I left. It wasn't pretty. That's all I can say. And as a result, um, when I think about it and what he did as far as firing me, and I tried to tell him, I said, you're firing the wrong guy. And then when I made the bet, said, I'd give you half my salary. And I bet you we get this team going. He said, well, I didn't know that. I said, well, why didn't you talk to me before you fired me? And he didn't. He called me. I was in Hartford in my hotel room, and I get a call from him before the hockey game. And he says, you're fired. First of all, he wanted me to quit. I said, I'm not quitting. I said, I got a job to do, and I'm here to do it. He said, well, then you're fired. And
Wow.
that's it. That's how I got fired. Then I come back in the morning. That night, I come back at 8 o'clock, and there are a whole bunch of press people at the airport to greet me, which wasn't very nice, but that's beside the point. But the thing is, when I went in the next morning to clean out my desk, I went into his office and thanked him for making me a general manager. He gave me the opportunity, and I'm forever grateful for that. But the thing is, I did an excellent job for him, and he didn't realize it. And I told him, that's when I made the bet. I said, I would have made a bet with you. Well, I didn't know. I said, well, why didn't you talk to me? And he didn't. He fired me, and that was it. And I told him he's firing the wrong guy. And I'm absolutely right. He fired the wrong guy.
And with that, let's move away from um, Harold for a little bit, and let's talk about one of your favorite people, Boria Salmi.
Yeah.
He is, in my opinion, again on the outside looking in, to me, I get the impression that he is one of your favorite people that you've had the opportunity to scout and have come to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Would that be accurate?
There's no doubt about that. He's the highlight of my career. There's no doubt about it. It's something that nobody else has done. If you really want to know, I went over to Europe, and I was called a special assignment scout, and Jim Gregory was the one that gave me that job and called me that, and gave me courage to say that's what I was. So I really was under his command, not the chief scout, but Jim Gregory was kind of my boss because he sent me here and he sent me there. I didn't do juniors except for when I was in town. I'd go and see junior games, and I had an opinion on some junior players like Lanny McDonald. But the thing is this, I didn't have that much say. Bob Davidson was the chief scout. Okay, and now that we're on Bob Davidson, just tell a few little stories. Bob Davidson was the chief scout of amateur scouting. And when I saw Boria, I was blown away by what I saw. And I said, there's no way anybody can play defense the way this guy can. He's got the moves that nobody else has. And so as a result, I grabbed him, and we got him, and we got Inga. And Inga was a really good player too, but they mishandled Inga. And the thing is this, he played on the third and fourth line, and he scored 20 goals a year while he was with the Maple Leafs. Now, 20 goals a year was pretty good playing on the third and fourth line. If he had been on the other line, I'd say he'd get 30 to 40 goals if he had been on the top two lines. But he never made it there because that's where the coaches put him, on the third and fourth line. And as a result, I thought that he was greatly mishandled, and that's bad on them. Not me. I wasn't coaching. That's them. Anyhow, to get back to Bob Davidson, some of the things that still gnaw at me, and I remember when I scouted Boria and Inga and said, I'm putting them on the negotiation list. And I told Jimmy Gregory, who was my hero. Jimmy Gregory was the best general manager, I thought, of all. But he got fired unceremoniously, really. And as a result, uh, when we put them on the negotiation list, and I come back to Toronto and I told them what they were like, and then we brought them over in May and we signed them. And I took them over to Niagara Falls to see the, I guess you call it the tower or whatever you want to call it. We saw the falls, come back, they signed their contracts, and they went back home. So Johnny McClellan, King Clancy, Bob Davidson, Jimmy sometimes, me, we'd be sitting there, and Johnny McClellan would say, Gerry, you better be right. And Bob Davidson, who came with me to Moscow to see those guys play, and also we had a player on the negotiation list, Anders Hedberg, and I really liked him. He was really a good player. And we invited him to our hotel, the Inn Tourist Hotel, which is right across from the Kremlin. And the thing is this, he showed up, he graciously came. And the first thing that happened was we were sitting there and Bob Davison jumped right in. He said, what makes you think you can play in the National Hockey League? And as soon as he said that, I said, we're finished. Because
No
that's the
kidding.
way you talk to them. You have to talk to them. You say, this is what I did when I saw Boria. I said, Boria, you can play for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Are you interested? And he nodded his head. And I said, Inga. He said, talk to Inga. He's got good English. And the same thing with Inga. I told him the same thing. I didn't say, do you think you could play in the National Hockey League? I knew they could play in the National Hockey League. Anyway, when we come back in the summertime after they signed, we'd be sitting there talking about it. And Johnny McCollum said, you better be. Bob Davison never said a word. And he was with me in Moscow. He saw them play. He didn't say, Gerry, you're right. Don't worry about it. I said, I went to Johnny McCollum. I said, I'll tell you something right now, Johnny. I said, this Boris Salming is going to be a superstar in the National Hockey League. You wait and see. And of course, the rest is history. And Bob Davison never said once, Gerry, you're right. Don't worry about it. And I kind of resented that. Now, maybe he resented me because this is my first year scouting, and I was kind of working for Jimmy and not Bob Davison because I wasn't really doing all that much junior when I was going to see the International League, I was going to see the American League, and I was going to see the National Hockey League. I didn't do that much scouting in the junior, but I went to see some of the really good players. And the thing is this, that once again, as I said, he never said a word. And I honestly resented that. And the resentment stayed with me. It didn't leave. Unfortunately, because Bob Davidson was around a long time. But then he eventually left the Maple Leafs too.
And it seems that they all seem to at some point leave the Toronto Maple Leafs. But you left a very good legacy that you can look back on and be proud, and that says a lot for who you are and what you've done. And I think that in spite of Harold, you formed some very, very good teams, and the Leaf fans, they showed that you did a good job by showing up to the games and cheering the team on, good, bad, or indifferent. And I think that says just so much for the man that you are as a hockey player, as a hockey man. And now you are enjoying retirement and that sort of thing. What are you doing in the way of watching hockey now?
Okay, just to back up a little bit, I'll have to tell you this, that lots of people get their hockey from the press, right? And as a result, there's noise out there
Exactly.
from fans. And some fans don't really realize the job that I did do. Okay. If anybody checks, and there were lots of people that did check, and they realized how good a job I really did do. Now, the thing is this, as I said before, I think the highlight of my hockey career was getting Borja Salming and Inga. And when they came and played, and the rest of the league saw, and when I went over there first, I was there by myself. I had the whole country to myself. There wasn't one scout there that first year that I went. 1972, December the 27th, I landed in Stockholm. And there wasn't one scout there for the next 2.5 weeks. And I had those two tournaments, the Hearn and the I forget the name of the other. It'll come to me. The two tournaments were going. The Star Cup. The two tournaments were going on, and I saw all those players, as many as I could. And the thing is this: when they saw the way Inga and Borja played, they flocked over there the next year because I went back again, and the place was crawling with scouts. And what happened then was the exodus from Europe. All those players come over because of that. So I kind of, in my own heart, know that I had a big deal in all those players coming from Europe. And all those players from Europe should say a little bit, thanks, Gerry, for doing that. Because you opened the thing up to us, and we ended up making loads and loads and loads of money. Now, and if that's my legacy, I'll take it. I'll
Yeah,
take it.
no kidding. I'll take it if you don't want it.
Like who has that influence? Who who
Exactly.
who had that influence to change the face of hockey? Now I know I was lucky. I understand that. But in the meantime, a scout might have gone over there and said, they're playing in the big rink, and there's lots of space and nothing's happening really. They're skilled in the whole bit. Lots of scouts would go over there and say, nah, I don't think so. Because maybe they're afraid to come back and say, yeah, I know so. And that's exactly what I did. I knew that these guys could play. Now, the unfortunate part about down the road, Mr. Ballard said, I don't want any more Europeans. And he started the thing by getting Borja and Inga. He started it, but he closed the door on it. And probably the younger Miroslav Inacek probably was the reason, because he didn't really play to the standards that he thought he could play. I never saw him play. And I told Mr. Ballard that. He said, he came to me one day and he said, I want you to go and get the young Imlak in the check. I said, Mr. Ballard, I've never seen him play. We've drafted him, 100 and something, because he was Watson Peter's brother. But the thing is this, I didn't see him, and nobody in our team saw him play. And so I didn't know, but he said, I want you to go over there and get him. The guys downstairs say he can play. That's Peter Inacek and Miroslav Fricher. They were in his ear, Mr. Ballard's, and told him that he could play. And he was a pretty good player. He was leading the league over there in scoring. But when I saw him, when we went over and got him, and that was when we flew into Vienna, and we were going to get him from there. And that was the day that the Israeli kiosk in Vienna was shot up. And as a result, we couldn't land in Stockholm, so we had to land 2 hours away. And then we had to come back, and I was really nervous then. I thought something was going to happen. We wouldn't be able to get him in the whole bit. But fortunately, we got back to Stockholm and we got him. And it took us a little while, but I guess the worst thing with me, the biggest roadblock, was the Canadian embassy. They didn't help me at all. And as a result, I had to start thinking of anybody that I knew, and I had some big numbers, some conservative government numbers, but they didn't help, except for I thought of one guy, Chris Spire, whose brother I played with, Peter, and I phoned him, and he was at a New Year's Eve party, and it was January, or not December the 31st. And I told him my problem. He said, Gerry, leave it with me. And anyhow, a couple of days later, I get a call from the embassy saying, get over here right now. You're leaving. And so they wanted me to bring the kids in because he brought a girlfriend with him. They wanted to bring them into them, and they were going to put them in a refugee camp. So I'm not going to put them in a refugee camp. Are you crazy? I would never do that. So anyway, we got them. They came. We had to fly to Vancouver and then come back to Toronto. That's how we got there. And when I saw Miroslav get on the ice, and Gordy Stellick was sitting beside me, and I elbowed him and I said, we're in trouble, because I didn't like his skating. Like I thought, I just said, I think he's going to have trouble keeping up. But the fortunate thing was give us a little bit of leeway. 2 nights later, he played in Buffalo, and doesn't he walk out from the corner and gets his first goal the first game he played. And Mr. Ballard, that's it. That's all I wanted to see. And he thought he was going to be a big hockey player.
All right, Gerry, I hate to cut you off, but unfortunately we are out of time.
Okay.
And you know how it works with electronics. It's going to kill off. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to talking to you after the holidays, just talking, saying hello. And that was a chat with